Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing incredibly well. We're on part 3 of our story tonight, and it's a fascinating story. We've learnt about a Bigfoot's intervention with an older woman who literally got heat stroke and was obviously saved by a Bigfoot, but at this stage nobody believes the old woman's story, because she's referring to the hairy man as a strange man she'd encountered in the woodgrove. But now the story gets even more interesting. So let's buckle our seatbelts and enjoy the ride. But before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's continue with part 3 of our story tonight. "That bad?" asked Nancy. "Sounds like you had a very lousy day, Tristan. But join the club. Nobody's very happy at the moment with this dreadful heat, are they? It's been all over the news that everybody needs to stay out of the heat. 2 people have already died, you know." "I heard about that on the news," said Tristan, leaving the kitchen to go and wash his hands in the upstairs bathroom. When Tristan returned to the table after washing his hands in the upstairs bathroom, Nancy had dished him up a generous plate of ham and salad, which he tucked into greedily. "Goodness gracious me," said Nancy, staring down at her husband's arms. "Is that a bite on your hand? You've got scratches all over your arms too, and on your cheek. What on earth happened to you? That bite looks very nasty. It could easily get infected if you don't watch out." "It was probably Bosman," chided Clarissa. "Was it Bosman that did it to you, Daddy? He's a naughty cat, you know. He's always scratching me, and he sometimes even bites. But he doesn't mean to be horrible. I know he doesn't mean it. He just likes to play a little rough. But he let me stroke him yesterday. He was purring. I think he's starting to really like me, Daddy." "That is because Bosman is a very nice cat," said Tristan. "He's just misunderstood, that's all. He might like to go butchering up the rats, but underneath the scratches and the biting is a very affectionate boy." "This is not a bite from Bosman," said Nancy, lifting her husband's hand to inspect it closely. She gave her husband an inquiring look, as she was in no doubt that this was a human bite. So who on earth had bitten her husband, and why? "Let me go and get the medical kit at once. Those wounds of yours need to be attended to," said Nancy, rising to her feet, her forehead puckered by puzzle lines. She was privately wondering who on earth could have bitten her husband and given him such a nasty bite. Out loud she simply said, "You need to have those wounds treated to at once. I'm not happy about the look of that bite mark. It looks red, inflamed and puffy, and it certainly did not come from Bosman." As Nancy began to use her surgical spirit on her husband's hand, she dabbed away with a piece of cotton wool. She observed the scratches all over his arms and one across his cheeks. What on earth had he been up to? If she didn't know any better, she would say he was having a secret affair with a hedge of thorny briars. But what about the bite mark? Where had that come from? It was definitely human in its origin. He was a travelling salesman, for goodness sake, driving a car around from state to state, and that did not involve walking through hazardous terrain, where you could easily be scratched up by burgeoning branches and bushes embedded with thorny briars. "This is a human bite, Tristan," she said to him. "What happened? Who bit you?" "I'm afraid it is human," Tristan admitted. He seemed to realize that lying to his wife would not get him anywhere. His wife had been a nurse at one point in her life, so there was no point in pulling the wool over her eyes. She knew a human bite when she saw one, and would not be easily fobbed off. Tristan tried to think quickly on his feet, for a suitable excuse to satisfy his wife's insatiable curiosity. He drew in a deep breath, for lying was not something that came very easily to him when talking to his wife. Nancy could smell out a lie like a cadaver dog could pick up the scent of a deceased corpse. He knew he needed to tread very carefully here to make up a believable story, and in his quintessential experience, the best way to do this was to knit some truth into the lie, so that hopefully he could hide all the fallen stitches. "I didn't want to tell you about it, love, but let's just say I've had better days than today. This is a day I shan't be forgetting in a hurry." "Are you kidding me, Tristan?" said Nancy, looking aghast. "Someone actually bit you?" Nancy's mouth dropped open as she tried to digest the startling revelation. "I'm afraid so, love. It's rather a long story." "Well, I'd like to hear it, Tristan. I really would." "Well, I went to an old lady's house. Her name is Mrs. Winston. She's been my client for many years, but she's a bit wacko, not completely right in the head. Let's just say I've been supplying her cleaning products for many years now, but she wanted a demonstration of our new Hoover. To cut a long story short, she got me to hoover 3 rooms in her house absolutely thoroughly, to see if she could see a discernible improvement in how they looked after I hoovered them with the new Hoover, so she could compare the suction quality to the Hoover she currently owns. Well, that's what she said anyway. I knew she wanted me to clean her bloody carpets for her, but what could I do? The woman's got money, and I knew I could get a potential sale out of her if I humoured her, so that's what I did. She had a granddaughter staying with her, a little girl about Clarissa's age. So I got to work, making sure I did a great job in hoovering all the carpets, because I wanted to get that sale. By mistake, I hit the back of a doll lying on the floor, that I gather belonged to her granddaughter. The girl screamed furiously. She said I'd hurt her doll. Then she ran towards me, grabbed my hand, bit it just like that, and lashed out at me with her nails. So she scratched me up quite a bit." "That girl did that to you? She bit you on the hand and scratched you? Goodness gracious me, I think I've heard everything now. What on earth did Mrs. Winston say about that? It's an appalling behaviour from her grandchild." "Well, of course, she apologised profusely. She said her grandchild had some learning issues, that sometimes she bites and scratches people, that she's a little bit wild, you could say." "I can't believe it. That girl needs to mind her manners. I hope Mrs. Winston told her grandchild off for such absurd and disgusting behaviour. That little girl needs to mind her manners. I don't care what learning impediment she may have. You don't go indiscriminately biting and scratching at people, for goodness sake. The girl's not a wild animal. You accidentally ran the Hoover over her doll, and she reacts like that. It's absolutely jaw-dropping. What about the scratch on your face? Well, on your cheek, I mean. Did she do that to you too?" "I'm afraid so," said Tristan. "She became very wild. She was so upset about that doll of hers." "Ah, she should be ashamed of herself, and that grandmother should be too," said Nancy, shaking her head furiously. "Fancy allowing your grandchild to behave like a demented zombie." "Well, it wasn't too bad, was it? I mean, after I hoovered Mrs. Winston's carpets, she did decide to purchase the Hoover. I think the granddaughter biting me made her feel rather guilty, so it sealed the deal, you could say. I think she felt quite bad about the bite." "Well, I hope so too. And I hope she reprimanded the brat. Look at Clarissa here. She's exactly the same age as that girl was. You wouldn't bite a stranger, would you, Clarissa? You'd never behave like that." "No, I'd never hurt anybody. But I was at school one day when one of the girls bit a boy because he dropped paint all over her picture in the classroom, and she was so cross with him. She got into trouble with the teacher because she bit the boy, and it actually bled." "Well, I should think she got into plenty of trouble. If you had done that, Clarissa, I'd have so much to say to you. I really would, and it wouldn't be good. Honestly, what is the world coming to? It's one thing for Bosman to bite, quite another for an 8-year-old child. I blame the parents for not raising the children right. If you let your kids get away with stuff like this is what ultimately happens." The house was bathed in a congenial silence after the family finally retired to bed, The only sound little Clarissa could hear was the tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall. Normally she never noticed this sound because she was so used to it by now, but somehow it was very conspicuous tonight. As the ticking sound drummed on in her head, it was almost as annoying as a dripping tap. The ticking grandfather clock's noises seemed to fade in the background when Clarissa heard a fly buzzing past her. It brushed across her cheeks. The annoying insect seemed to be singling out Clarissa for torment, and she wanted to get her hands on that critter and squash it. The fly continued to pester her, and she lashed out with her hands to try and swat it away, but the fly eluded her. Weren't flies supposed to sleep at night, she thought? If that were the case, this fly didn't seem to know the difference. She reached over to her bedside lamp and switched on the light, so that her bedroom was basked in a soft glow. She could now see the fly buzzing around her room, and began to chase after it. Ah, there it was! Clarissa was going to grab it, and when she did, she would crush it so hard it would regret the night that it actually bothered her. She could see it buzzing around the room. It was impossible to chase, as it became a losing battle for her. Finally, Clarissa stood up on her bed. It was situated under the window. The mattress creaked under her light weight as she forcefully yanked back the curtains so that the draughts of warm air from the half-open window might actively encourage the fly to leave. Once, of course, it had sensed there was an opportunity for it to escape. She let out a huge relieved sigh when the fly finally flew out of the window, and her plan had worked, for it was gone. Maybe she could finally get some much-needed sleep. It was a flash of very quick movement in the backyard that suddenly grabbed Clarissa's undivided attention. What was that, she wondered? She had recognized the distinctive dark silhouette at once that disappeared into the woods to be that of her father. It would seem her father must have also been struggling to get some sleep. Clarissa could guess where he was going. He was looking for the quintessential opportunity to cool down. He was going to the creek for a swim, wasn't he? He often took midnight dips at the creek to cool off. The idea of swimming with her father under the canopy of the silvery stars was wonderful. They could easily splash around together and possibly even play Marco Polo together if her father was up to it. Clarissa didn't hesitate to dash to her closet. She put on her swimming costume beneath the sundress. She then slipped on her sneakers and very discreetly slid down the banisters, taking care not to wake her mother up. She knew instinctively if her mother Nancy knew what she was up to tonight, she wouldn't be best pleased with her. She'd often told Clarissa that her father could be very grumpy, like Bosman the cat. But Clarissa knew that Bosman was becoming much more affectionate these days towards her, and the more time she spent with the cat, the nicer he became. He had scratched her up something bad, had bitten her and even drawn blood on occasion, but she had realized that devoting more attention to Bosman, he was slowly coming around to her, warming to her a little, and possibly the same technique could be applied to her father. Clarissa grabbed a beach towel from the downstairs laundry cupboard and rolled it up into a tight bundle, which she placed under her arm. She grabbed a little flashlight that she found in one of the kitchen cupboards. She glanced briefly at the kitchen clock to read the time. It was 2:10 in the morning. She couldn't believe it was this late. She didn't think she'd ever been up at this time before. Sleep appeared to have eluded her, like it had obviously done her father. Even Mrs. Clarence, their neighbour that they'd bumped into at the ice cream parlour earlier on that day, had been talking about how impossible it was to get to sleep at night, as everywhere in Wyoming people were tossing and turning in their beds, especially if you lived further away from the mountains. The further you lived away from the mountains, the worse it became. Clarissa reasoned if you couldn't sleep at night, you might as well get up and do something. She knew her father wouldn't be too pleased if she followed him into the woods, but she didn't care about that. Surely her father would completely understand her inabilities to sleep tonight in this hot, insufferable weather. Maybe he'd actually be glad for her company. As after all, it was terribly boring to swim on your own, was it not? Besides anything else, her father had faithfully promised to take Clarissa swimming in the morning to the creek. And it was already morning, was it not? Give or take a few hours here and there, and of course the absence of any light. Clarissa was an excellent swimmer, even at 8 years old, but she thought it would be fun to swim at night, which was something she'd never done before. But there was a first time for everything, and there was no time like the present. The night seemed ethereally magical, although the cicadas were making quite a commotion, and the trilling, humming insect vibration seemed to overtake every other sound in the woods. It was warm outside for the mountains, when the temperature should drop significantly at night, so this weather was unusual, but it was infinitely cooler out of doors than it had been in the house, and so Clarissa did gain some light relief. The sky was a black artist's canvas, but it wasn't scary, as a full moon smiled down on her like a friendly face, and the stars in the sky were as bright and as pretty as the diamante jewels in one of her mother's favourite black purses that she loved so much, that she only ever used on special occasions. Clarissa could run like a whippet if she wanted to, so she scrambled hurriedly down the rugged windy paths on her skinny knees, which she knew like the back of her hand, although her parents had never allowed her to play beyond the creek, so she'd never been further into the grove. She had been warned on several occasions by her father that it was not safe to go deep into the woods. He claimed he had seen a mountain lion loitering around in there once, and that story had scared Clarissa half to death. Of course she liked to look at pictures of mountain lions, and admitted they were incredibly handsome wild animals. But she knew, unlike Bosman, these cats were not to be tamed or trusted. She didn't fancy the idea of an encounter with one of these things. "But are you sure you saw a mountain lion, Tristan, in the woods?" her mother had asked her father sceptically. "I wouldn't have thought they'd wander so close to our property. I would have thought they'd stay closer to the mountains." "I'm very sure I saw a mountain lion," her father had responded insistently, "which is precisely why I'm saying that Clarissa here under no circumstances can go and explore the grove beyond the creek. She would be easy pickings for a mountain lion. As I keep saying, it's not remotely safe." Clarissa's father's ominous words had sealed the deal, rather like an invisible contract you never signed, but have a clear understanding of. Without question, there had been many times when temptation had wooed her curiosity and encouraged her to explore deeper in the woodgrove, when a little voice had whispered, "Go on, Clarissa, why don't you venture deeper into the grove? Your dad will never know. It'll be our secret. What harm can it possibly do?" Clarissa had ignored the persuasive voice that had urged her to do many courageous things, from climbing trees that intimidated her, to peeking at the Christmas presents her parents had brought her every year, that they hid high up in the closet. Unbeknown to them, Clarissa would take a quick peek, because waiting for Christmas was almost impossible. It would seem her father's words had slackened her resolve, as visions of a mountain lion stalking her through the woods had put an abrupt end to any fanciful thinking on her part. But on this night, everything was different, as even the air in the woodgrove was filled with the essence of opportunity that had taken hostage all doubts, fears, and uncertainties, as any thoughts of mountain lions and predatory creatures like that, lurking clandestinely in the darkness, eager to stalk her, didn't even tease her imagination, as all Clarissa could think about was being lovingly embraced by the cool, refreshing water of the creek and enjoying a swim with her father. The smell of pine terpenes, mingled with fresh earthen smells, were very pronounced that night, so much so that they were much more discernible than during the day, along with the sweet heady scent of wild jasmine that lingered in the air. The moonlight magnanimously cast her silvery spell across the woods, allowing soft trickles of light to pass through the trees, and lighting everything up in a pearly luminescence that washed over the landscape and confiscated some of the darkness, so that the rugged paths that snaked through the trees were so much less obscure. In Clarissa's mind, everything was welcoming, as if the trees themselves in the grove were delighted to see her. So Clarissa, unlike so many other 8-year-olds her age, did not find the walk through the trees to be intimidating. She'd caught up with her father very discreetly, making sure her father did not see her. He was moving with a purposeful stride down a path with a flashlight in his hand that was so incredibly bright that it fully lit the path ahead. Clarissa switched her torchlight off, discreetly following him down the rugged trail through the trees. A little voice in her head was warning her to go back home.
"You're not supposed to leave the house at night. You might get into trouble. You know what your dad's like. I don't think he's going to be pleased to see you. He might be cross. He really might be cross with you."
Clarissa was secretly very intimidated by her father, but she never liked to admit this to herself. Like Bosman the cat, she considered him to be a work in progress, and she was sure in the end she'd win her father around. What harm could it do anyway, if she joined him for a swim at the creek? She'd make her presence known. Once her father dived into the water, she'd jump in behind him and give him the surprise of his life. She imagined her father would be cross with her at first, but the cool water would soothe away his anger, as once you were in the water, you'd be happier. Everyone was happy once they were in the water. She was sure he'd come round, like Bosman the cat. When Clarissa played with Bosman, he always looked at her scathingly, as he did not altogether trust her, and he was cynical that hanging around a little girl could be any fun at all. But the cat toys that Clarissa had recently bought for Bosman in town had worked a treat on the cantankerous cat, and Bosman had become very playful of late, and she had discovered a much more affectionate side to his nature that she had never encountered before. Nothing was impossible. Even the Bible said as much. Only the other day Bosman had seen Clarissa and bounded up to her and purred. He'd rubbed his sleek body against her, and he had allowed Clarissa to stroke him, which was a first. As Clarissa followed her father through the woods, she noticed he was taking the straight path ahead through the trees. She knew that path led away from the creek to forbidden territory. Clarissa was surprised by this. Why was her father not going directly to the creek? Where was he going? She had never been allowed to venture deeper into the woods, so if she did follow her father now, she'd need to be incredibly quiet. Ostensibly, if he was to find her following her into the restricted part of the woodgrove where she was not allowed to venture, she'd get into heaps of trouble. Of that she was in no doubt. She needed to be very careful. You could only push her father so far before he lost it with you. She had discovered that from experience. Clarissa's father, of course, had never been physically abusive to her or her mother. Indifferent, most certainly, snappy and short-tempered, of course. But her father never really got mad, unless he was pushed so far. Then he'd develop this cold, hard look in his eyes, if you pressed his buttons the wrong way. And that look had always scared Clarissa half to death. Clarissa could hear the sound of her father's boots pounding the leaf litter as he ambled steadily down the trail. He was limping on one of his legs, and occasionally appeared to wince in pain. She wisely kept her distance behind him, running discreetly from tree to tree, and it was beginning to become like a game for her that she was actually enjoying, rather like playing hide-and-seek with her father. Only he didn't know he was playing it with her, which made it all the more fun. Soon an old-looking shack came into view. It was nestled in the middle of the woods. It looked rather like a tool shed, or a place where you stored coal or firewood. Then she realized it must be her father's workshop. Of course, that is what it was. Clarissa's father had spoken about the workshop often enough, as her father liked to work in the woods, and would often go to his workshop for some recreational time to be with himself. He'd tell Clarissa's mother he needed some space, so this was the workshop he talked about. For a moment Clarissa noticed her father seemed rather hesitant. He stopped outside his workshop and was looking behind him very apprehensively. Clarissa held her breath. He didn't know that he was being followed, did he? Could he sense he was being watched? What if he were to find her, skulking behind one of the trees? She knew she would be in awful trouble if he was to discover her. Please God, may he not discover her. She sighed with relief when her father seemed satisfied that no one was around. He bent down on the ground and began to brush the leaves and pine needles away from the forest floor. What was he doing, she wondered. She held her breath, peering behind the tree, to observe her father's rather bizarre movements. There was a secret wooden door in the ground, and her father was pulling back the outside bolt, and then he trotted down these concrete steps deep into the ground. It was like one of those air raid shelters her mother had told her about, that people would go and hide in during the war. Where was he going? What was her father doing? She didn't even know about this place. Did her mother even know about it? She seriously doubted it. Her father was acting very furtive.
As Clarissa thought about all this in earnest, she couldn't help but feel a burgeoning excitement swelling up inside her, like a sponge being filled with water to full capacity. Of course she knew what her father was doing. He was fixing up a bicycle for her birthday, wasn't he? He had promised her he'd get her a brand new one, as she had outgrown her old one. She loved her old bike, of course she did. Her father had made that one up for her as well. But it really was on its last legs now. It squeaked all the time, and it was rusty in places. So a new one would be very nice, wouldn't it? Her father had come to his workshop to prepare a birthday present for her, as Clarissa's birthday was in 2 days' time. She'd been counting the seconds for her birthday to arrive. She could hardly wait. There was going to be a birthday party where all her friends would be invited, and she knew she'd get tons of presents and plenty of delicious birthday cake, and hopefully lots of ice cream. Clarissa had gone with her mother to choose her birthday cake from the baker in town, and she'd taken a picture of Bosman to the baker and asked her to make a cake of her cat for her birthday party. She had overheard her father talking to her mother about how he needed to make it perfect for Clarissa's birthday. "I've got a very nice surprise for her that she's going to love, but I'm afraid it needs lots of work," she had overheard him say. Now everything made perfect sense to Clarissa. She was putting the pieces of the peculiar puzzle together. Her father had not been able to sleep, and had promptly decided to come and work on her bicycle, to get it ready in time for her birthday, as of course it was in 2 days' time, so he didn't have much time left to make it absolutely perfect for her. A big smile erupted on Clarissa's face as she tried to imagine the bicycle her father was preparing for her. He'd always been so very good with his hands, so she knew that it would be a very special bike, and she hoped that there'd be lots of pink on her bike, tassels on the handbars, a nice bell perhaps, maybe a bit of sparkling bling, and a pink basket placed in the front of the handlebars, so her dolls could come on her bicycle rides with her. And, of course, she could take picnics in her basket and eat sandwiches by the creek. Clarissa tried to imagine the bicycle her father was preparing for her. She realized he could be a long time in his underground workshop working on her bike, but she decided she'd wait patiently. Finally her father came out of the opening of the ground, sooner than she would imagine he would. He was muttering under his breath. He didn't look at all pleased. Clarissa was certain she'd heard him say, "Bloody bitch." She watched her father doing up his flies of his chinos, as if he'd only just been to the toilet or something. Maybe there was a bathroom in the underground workshop. She watched her father bolt the door and then cover it with leaves, as if he wanted to hide the door from scrutinizing eyes. He was grunting under his breath as he limped through the trees, making his way back to the house. Clarissa would be wise to do the same, and to clandestinely slip back to the house. The more she thought about the bicycle her father was preparing for her birthday, the more urgent the desire for her to see the bike. "I just want a little peek," she told herself, "just a wee little peek." Once Clarissa was certain her father was long gone, she ran over to the ground and began to move away the pine needles and leaves that covered the hidden door. Suddenly she heard a rattling noise, as if her father was coming back. Her heart began to boom violently in her chest, so much so that the noise in her ears was deafening. If her father found her, trying to get access through the secret door into his underground workshop or bunker, or whatever you choose to call it, he'd be as mad as hell. Of that she knew with certainty. And the last thing that Clarissa wanted was to provoke her father to rage. In her deep-down instincts, she knew that she was afraid of awakening the dragon within him. Clarissa waited for a few brief seconds, sighing with relief. She must have been mistaken, she thought. The woods had become ominously quiet. Even the humming sounds of the insects had all but retreated. If she'd known any better, she might have realized that this unnatural silence might not have actually been a good sign. Had she been older, she'd have described the woodgrove as becoming somewhat airy. Clarissa made light work of the bolt, pulling it back rather easily. It was well oiled. They had the same bolt on the yard shed at home, so it was easy enough to figure out how it worked. Once she pulled back the bolt, she stared down at the steep concrete steps that led down to the ground below. It looked just like a cellar, she thought, or an air raid shelter of some kind. It was dark and oppressive in this underground workshop, but so strong was her desire to see her new bicycle that Clarissa didn't hesitate to venture down those steep steps. The enthusiasm within her could not be suppressed, even by a faint peppering of doubt. It was when she arrived to the bottom of the steps that she heard a strange whimpering sound. It was in that moment that Clarissa's excitement seemed to escalate. She realized her father had not been coming here to fix up a bicycle for her birthday after all. Her father had bought her a puppy. That had to be it. It made perfect sense that he'd keep a puppy here and come and feed it during the night. He wanted to keep the puppy as a surprise for Clarissa. How often had she begged and begged her dad for a puppy? He had always said, "We will see." And finally all her begging had paid off in leaps and bounds. He had actually gone and got her a puppy after all. A puppy was a zillion trillion times better than a bicycle. She thought, her heart leaping in excited expectation. The poor thing must be so frightened being kept alone underground like this. Did her father not know that keeping a puppy down here, in this dark, inconspicuous place, was an unkind thing for him to do? With the soft light of her torch, Clarissa scanned the underground room, that smelt very unpleasant, of damp, dust and ammonia. The light of her torch illuminated dusty shelves covered with rusty old paint cans that looked so old, probably from generations ago. But where was the puppy, she wondered? She could see a wooden work desk covered with carpenter's tools, and a collection of hunting knives that looked terribly sharp. Why did her father keep such horrible weapons, she wondered? She could see a sander and some pieces of wood, in all shapes and sizes, stacked against the wall, haphazardly, all covered with cobwebs and dust. There was an old door off its hinges, and a couple of old French windows stacked against the wall, that seemed to have long since been forgotten about. The whimpering sound continued, and Clarissa felt very concerned for the poor puppy. Where was it? How long had her dad kept this puppy down here for? She didn't think her father really understood animals, because you shouldn't treat them like this. Apart from Bosman, of course. He seemed to understand Bosman. So was it any surprise to her that he'd keep a puppy in this uncongenial dark place? No, not really. Clarissa began navigating the flashlight across the far corner of the wall, to the next wall and the next. She began calling out the puppy's name. "Where are you, boy?" she called out. "Where are you?" She was longing to find the puppy, wrap her arms around the poor little thing to reassure it. She hoped with all her heart it was a golden retriever. Please God, may it be a golden retriever puppy. They were the cutest, most adorable puppies in the entire world. She had always wanted a golden retriever, with a cute face, dark eyes, and layers upon layers of soft golden bouncy blonde fur. But when she flashed her torchlight in the corner of the room, she nearly jumped out of her skin, when she saw a pair of eyes staring up at her. But these eyes did not belong to a puppy. At first Clarissa didn't know what she was seeing, so she fixed the light steadily on those eyes, and was horrified to discover they belonged to a woman, who was seated on a dirty, very narrow mattress, covered in ugly brown stains. A long chain was attached to the woman's ankle. She was anchored to the floor, which meant she was pretty much trapped in this uncongenial space, like a dog on a chain. And the ammonia that Clarissa was smelling was probably from the woman's own ablutions. She could see a bucket close to where the woman was sitting that smelt very bad. The woman's face was covered in so much dust that it made her hollow, almost lifeless eyes stare at Clarissa like a corpse. "Who are you?" asked the woman, her eyes staring up at Clarissa through the torchlight, as if she thought she was seeing things, and was certain her eyes must be tricking her. "My name is Clarissa. I'm 8 years old. What's your name?" "Are you real? You're not a ghost, are you?" asked the woman. "Please tell me you're not a ghost. I couldn't bear it if you were a ghost, because a ghost wouldn't be able to help me." "No, silly, I'm not a ghost," laughed Clarissa. "What's your name?" "You mean you're real? I can't help wondering if I'm hallucinating half the time. I'm so hungry and so tired. Sometimes I can't distinguish between what is real and what is not." "I'm real, of course I'm real. What's your name? Why have you been crying? I heard you whimpering. I thought you were a puppy. Your eyes are puffy and red. Your face is so covered with dirt. You look like you've been lying in a coal mine. You're so thin. Why are you thin? My daddy didn't hurt you, did he? I followed him here. I thought he was keeping a birthday surprise from me. I wanted to see what it was. Why is he keeping you here? I don't understand. My name's Catherine Beavis. You have to help me, Clarissa. You have to help me. You look like a clever girl. I'm going to need your help. Do you think you can help me, Clarissa? It depends on what you want me to do, said Clarissa, considering the question with much thought. I'm in trouble, Clarissa. Big, big trouble. I need your help. Your father brought me here. Look what he did to me. She pointed to the brown stains on the mattress that Clarissa soon realized were blood. Her eyes grew round with horror. She did not realize her father had beaten up this poor woman. Clarissa looked confounded. My daddy hurt you? She asked, her face growing as white as a lily. My daddy says you should never hit a girl, but he hit you. The woman nodded. Well, if he told you that, he was lying. Your dad hurt me really badly. He beat me hard, punched me in the chest. He raped me. Do you know what it means to rape someone, Clarissa? Do you know what that means? Clarissa nodded. My mother told me all about rape. She said bad men can hurt women like that. Did my dad rape you? But why would he do that? I don't understand. I tried to bite him, lash out at him. But I'm so much smaller than he is. Your father is a strong man, Clarissa. I should never have accepted a lift from him. None of this would have happened. I really thought I could trust him. It just goes to show what a poor judge of character I really am. Your father told me he's been fantasizing about doing this to a woman for a long time. He said he prepared this place for his warped sadomasochist fantasies. Your dad is a monster, Clarissa. I know you don't want to hear this, but no normal person would do this to a woman, would they? He beat me up, Clarissa, punched me in the ribs. He really, really hurt me. He chained my ankle. Look at this. I can barely move, except to get to the water bottles over there and to the bucket over there for my ablutions, that he leaves for days, so it stinks to hell of ammonia in here. And I have to breathe it all in. It's been insufferable, but I've had to get used to it. It does stink very bad of ammonia. You're right. I can't believe he leaves the bucket there for you like that. He treats you like an animal. He does, Clarissa. And I have to breathe it all in. But I've got used to it. You can get used to anything, you know, if you're exposed to it for long enough. Your father only gives me food if I behave myself. So I'm half-starved, Clarissa. I haven't eaten for a long time. Sometimes I feel so faint and so dizzy with hunger. That's why I thought I imagined you. That's why I thought you weren't real. But I am real. You can touch me if you like. So there we are. That is the end of part 3. Part 4 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.